VCCircle speaks to Ashish Dhawan, who is a co-founder of one of India's most successful private equity firms, Chris Capital. He quit a lucrative career in private equity to set up Central Square Foundation, a philanthropy fund focused on improving the educational outcomes for low-income children in India. In an interview to VCCircle, Dhawan opens up on the Central Square Foundation, philanthropy and the private equity industry.
When was the time in your life when you realized that you're done with private equity onto philanthropy?
I've been thinking about doing something beyond private equity for a long time. Actually, even before I started Chris Capital, I had decided when I was at business school in the US that somewhere in my mid-40s I wanted to have a second career. Of course, when I started Chris Capital, I was buried with doing the job of investing, and that was where I spent 100% of my time. I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, I started to get onto the boards of a few non-profits, and so on a Saturday I would do a board meeting. It didn't eat into my time in private equity, but at least I started to think about some of the social sectors and realized that education was definitely the area that I wanted to focus on. So it had been playing on my mind for a long period of time.
But why only education? Do you think that is the biggest problem in India right now?
So first of all, I believe that, I know a lot of philanthropic organizations tend to pick up multiple causes. 4 or 5 different causes. Many foundations will focus on livelihood, healthcare, education. Typically these are the sustainable energy, things like that. We said, look, at the end of the day, if we want to do, these are all massive problems. If you want to even make some difference, you really have the bandwidth to do one of them. And then we had to prioritize. So I think it was a combination of personal passion, something I'm most passionate about. Secondly, when I think about, I've been a business person, when I think about India's challenges, clearly healthcare and malnutrition are challenges. I think the markets will solve some of those problems. As India gets richer, malnourishment is going to come down, etc. I think with education we have a fundamental problem where, the state delivers a large proportion of the education, unlike healthcare where private plays a much larger role. And it's completely broken. The gestation period is very long. If we change preschool today, we'll see an impact 15 years later when that person, that child, finally comes out. And you need to fix every piece of the value chain in between, including college. So it's a very long gestation period. And so I think because our system is broken, as a country we're heading into sort of middle income category in the next decade or two, we're going to have a huge crisis if we don't fix our education system. So I did some sort of strategic thinking and said from a longer term perspective, I think this is the single biggest area where we need to focus our minds and attention.
Any particular 2 or 3 problems that you tend to sort of identify for yourself and you particularly see that you can at least endeavor to fix them by Central Square Foundation?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we said we'll only focus on school education, not higher education. Because I think higher education, whilst there are lots of problems, it's still, in my mind, it's in better shape than school education. And I think school education is more important because we want an equitable, just, humane society. The differences start to emerge in school itself. And so that's why only 15-18% of our kids end up in college. I think as far as the most important areas, it's a good question. I think the 4 that we have identified. First is accountability. We believe that, the system, you need to build capacity, but the most important thing in our system is we need better accountability, which means better data transparency, better ways to assess and rate not just students but schools. So all kinds of mechanisms that will lead to better accountability in the system. Because currently teachers don't show up, they're not teaching, we don't know which are the best schools, and so we don't have the data to be able to know what are the right interventions. That's one. Second area is education technology.
Okay.
I think if we take a sort of 10-year view of the world, I think technology is going to have a big impact on education. It's already starting to have a big impact on higher education. We've seen with the global, online courses that are available. I think that devices and bandwidth will become ubiquitous in the next 5 to 7 years, because device prices, mobile phones everybody has already, but with tablet prices dropping dramatically, I think other devices also will become accessible. And devices where it's easier to watch video, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, etc. Bandwidth with 4G, I'm quite confident within the next 5 years, we'll have more ubiquitous bandwidth. So we really need to focus on how do we get the right content, how do we write the right assessments, the data. So I think EdTech is a big area, and the commercial companies would play a big role. And I think the goal of philanthropic organizations like ours is how do we make sure that this penetrates the school system, government school system, or how does it get to lower income children? Because that I think will be a challenge, which the commercial companies will only focus on the upper income private schools. Third area is training. I think that clearly when we look at education, the single biggest factor that a good system has is good human capital, right? Good principals, good teachers. And so there we are looking at, we've started a school leadership institute. We are looking at a variety of different things around teacher training and principal training, but also how do you select teachers, how do you, career progression, those kinds of issues are important. And the last one is schools. So we are looking at how one can build or create affordable schools that are really high quality, and how one can take the existing affordable schools and improve their quality. So we're working on both of those. And part of the solution there is PPP, particularly in urban India, because there's a lot of infrastructure that is lying empty, particularly in government school buildings. And how do we utilize it more effectively going forward, given the lack of space in our urban centers in particular. So these are the 4 areas we've identified. There's a two other areas we believe are very important, which we have not prioritized as yet. One is early childhood. A lot of the brain development happens prior to age 6. We're looking particularly ages 3 to 6 and what kind of interventions will work. And the last one would be having a sharper focus on some of the things that are necessary in secondary school. How do you build vocational skills, counseling, and life skills into secondary school? So these are the areas.
But tell me one thing, so is it like a corpus to Central Square Foundation, and how much you sort of typically invest into these companies? You came from a very private equity sort of background, so why do you choose philanthropy as opposed to say impact investing maybe?
So that's a good question. I thought about it a lot, and I basically said, that impact investing you're constrained because you're always trying to find even philanthropy, you want things to be sustainable. But I think when you're serving the poorest segment, or a lot of the work we're doing is related to advocacy, we're not going to make money. So I said, let's just get that out of the equation, because I found that if I had to go with an impact investment approach, my universe of things I would do would be much, much smaller. I wouldn't get into headmaster training, because I don't think I would automatically start to look at other solutions within education. But I do believe teacher training, headmaster training, really, really important. So I think that the philanthropic approach is better from that perspective. Your ambit is much wider. You start to think about the system as opposed to which are the narrow slices of the system where some money can be made or some commercial return can be garnered. Second is, I think, from the standpoint of advocacy, if you want policy change to happen, being philanthropic allows us to, we are working in the nation's interest. We're not working to make, even if it's a lower return for investors. And I think when we go talk to policymakers today, bureaucrats, politicians, everybody knows we have no agenda here. It's not like I'm coming to promote education technology because I have 4 investments in education technology. I'm doing because I believe it's good for the country. So, and I think that as a commercial entity, you always have a challenge in playing in the policy space, because people always view you with suspicion. So you want to take with some agenda, which is always the case, because you will always try to further your agenda. So I think those are the 2 reasons. Now, having said that, I think the danger of doing the old style philanthropy is that you don't have the same accountability as you have in the corporate world or the private equity world. So what we've tried to do is at least take my experience from private equity and say, how do we build that into this world? So with the philanthropy, we call it venture philanthropy, which is, even though these are grants, We are doing due diligence on these social entrepreneurs. We go and look at a space the way a private equity, the reason we broke down into these verticals, the way a private equity fund would say, I'm looking at financial services or IT as a vertical, and build a team around that, build expertise around it. Even the way we work with these organizations, we're much more hands-on. Typically in the philanthropic world, you cut a check and you don't really get that involved. You want some report to come back to you. We roll up our sleeves and work closely with these folks. So that's one piece of it. And then the second piece of it is we're focused on this policy change. So every investment, which is a grant that we make, one is there have to be certain metrics and there has to be an evaluation framework. So we know our money is well spent. It's almost like an ROI we're trying to get at, right? In terms of what, even though it's philanthropic, what's our ROI? But it also then has to be connected with policy. Because we believe the role of philanthropy is to do this R&D work, but the biggest ROI we'll get is if we can connect it with government. Because the scale will come from government. So that's really what we're trying to do, and that's the reason why we're a philanthropic entity and not a commercial entity.
How much you typically invest into these social entrepreneurs, and is it like a corpus approach? Like I said, you've learned a lot of sort of discipline from your private equity practice earlier. So how does that sort of play into Central Square Foundation?
So our belief is that the first 3 years, I made a lot of mistakes when I did Chris Capital, and I believe the same will happen here. Because I think that early on you don't know it very well, you learn as you go, etc. So we've decided that early on we want to make very, very small commitments because we're going to make mistakes. And two, the ecosystem itself, we're getting a lot of new non-profits started. And frankly, they don't need that much money. You know, we have a little bit of this commercial approach as well. You know, same thing, I believe when you start a company, you have to be frugal. And too much money will ruin even a good startup, right? So it's the same approach here. So typically our ticket size is only 25 lakhs to 1 crore per project. We have about 14 different projects going right now. So we can have a much bigger, unlike private equity, we'll only do 2, 3, 4 things per year. We can do many more. The advantage is we can always scale up. So if we give somebody, you know, some amount of money for a limited period of time, nothing stops us from actually doing more later. Although we want to preserve our money for earlier stages, because our belief is in philanthropy. If you look at the landscape, there is not much seed capital available. There's a lot of people who, once something is working, are willing to give money. So once a Pratham was proven to be successful, they managed to raise millions of dollars from the US, from India, etc. But it's the early days which are always the most challenging for a social entrepreneur. So we want to keep our money largely for that. But then we spend a fair amount of money also on our team. So we have currently about 15, 16 people. We're looking to hire more. So we want to take it up to between 20 to 25 people.
So what does people do?
So so on the venture philanthropy side, when after we finish this round of hiring, we will have about 12 people. So 3 people per vertical. We're staffed a little bit like a private equity fund. We have an associate director who runs the vertical, a program manager, who's the person in between, or senior program manager, and like an analyst associate kind of person at the junior level. So those 3 people run the vertical. We have 4 verticals, so 12 people. If we add a 5th, it'll go to 15 people, right? And then the rest of the organization is focused on the policy change side. And we think for policy change, there are 3 things required. One is research, second is outreach, so communication, and the third is advocacy, going and meeting with bureaucrats, politicians, building relationships. And we need about 7, 8 people in that area. We've only got about 4 people in that area right now. So we'll have a combination of 12 to 15 here and about 8 people there. So 20 plus people, a couple of people doing admin type work. So about 20 plus people in the organization, relative to about 15, 16 today.
Then how does economics work? Like there's no sort of commercial element attached to it. It's a philanthropic organization. So it's all completely funded by your personal capital, or do you have external investors also?
So I initially decided that, there are some friends who wanted to put some money in as well. And they're still keen. And so we will take outside money, that's for sure. So far, I funded it myself because our belief has been a little bit like, we're making tons of mistakes right now. So may as well, and also we're defining what our strategy is. Before clear strategy emerges, it's better to not have to go and, if we raise money or get money, not raise as in people give us money, 10 people, I have to be very clear with them, this is exactly what we're doing. So right now we're experimenting a lot. So I have committed 50 crore to this. I haven't put it in as a corpus because unfortunately our rules around corpus in non-profit, you have to use the money in 5 years, there's a whole bunch of them. So I just give it's a little bit like a drawdown structure in private equity. So as and when this entity needs money, I just keep putting money in on a regular basis. So that I'll keep funding. But we will start taking in some outside money maybe next year onwards, once we have a clear plan in terms of scale up from here. And I will still continue to contribute as well, even after other people have started to put money in.
But why not go like an Omidyar Network way? They do grants, but they sort of also tend to monetize it.
Yes, so Omidyar does both. They do pure grants, but they also do the impact investment.
Yeah.
So we think, the problem with that is that they are not looking to do the advocacy work that I was talking about. US organizations are restricted in that you cannot do advocacy work in another country, lobbying, that kind of stuff. And anyway, as a foreign player, you are perceived as someone coming from the outside, giving gyan, etc. So I think for them, their model is very much the right model, which is to do grants plus the impact investing, and they have the bandwidth to be able to do both. We figured that we'd rather expend our bandwidth on doing the grants and the policy change. So we've also picked two things, but we said we don't want to do the commercial or impact investment piece. I do believe also there are somewhat different skill sets that are required. So I'm not sure that within our organization we can do, both, because at the end of the day, even if you're doing impact investments, you still have to focus on getting the commercial return. Your mind, as I said, the space narrows dramatically. If you look at even Omidyar's portfolio of education in India, like some of the things around the work around teachers and stuff like that is all philanthropic. They grant to Teach for India, etc. Because you can't really make commercial returns in that space. Whereas the commercial return portfolio has been more around preschool or assessment, things like that. So the problem is that then, as I was mentioning at the conference day before yesterday, I think if you're looking from a commercial lens, you then start to focus very, very narrowly on 3-4 slices of the education space. And core education, which is schools, you tend not to focus on, particularly government schools. Core issues like people issues, human capital, teachers, principals, you tend not to focus on. Or like we want to do something around open educational resources, providing free educational resources on the internet, on the mobile phone. As a commercial entity, that's not something you would ever want to do, build that ecosystem. Or accountability, we can't do that, as I said, again, as a commercial entity. So we're very clear that, I thought about this quite a bit. Is that I think we had a choice to be one or the other. A social impact fund or this kind of
purely philanthropy.
Purely philanthropic. And I think we've chosen, and it's, by the way, that's the way most organizations are. I think this impact investing thing is a new thing. If you look at most foundations in the US, like a Gates or the Walton family, which is the second largest foundation in education in the US, or the Rockefeller Foundation of Ford, they're purely philanthropic. But they are now starting to incorporate some of the features of the commercial world in terms of the accountability, metrics, ROI. Those questions are being asked even in the philanthropic world. I want to be very clear on our focus. Our focus is on low-income children, right? And as I said, we do think that the policy change or the advocacy is very important. So mixing commercial interest, I think somehow then you lose your purity in terms of what you want to achieve. I mean, we are doing, for instance, 1 or 2 projects where we're working closely with the ministry. I don't think we'd be able to do that if we were a commercial entity. We wouldn't, I know for a fact. So I think it's better to keep it pure.
You don't expect to make any money out of it?
No, clearly no. There's no money to be made out of this. So it's not even like we're getting money back, because it's not like we're lending money, it's a grant. It's going away. If there is a model later where it can be a loan to a certain entity and that money can come back and it can be reused for another entity, I'd love to figure that out, but I don't see how that will work.
You built Chris Capital, India's largest, most successful private equity fund. Till now, if you speak to LPs, they're like, they still remember that in that era sort of completely ended with you transitioning out of it. So what is your personal goal and ambition with Central Square Foundation?
First of all, I don't believe that era has ended. I think Chris Capital is a very competent team. I think clearly private equity has gone through a little bit of a tough phase the last few years. But everything works in cycles. There was a very, very good cycle. We started in 99. There was a very tough cycle till 2002. A lot of people got weeded out, 2003. And then there was an up cycle. And then there was a down cycle now. But the down cycle almost creates the up cycle. So there will be another up cycle. So what do I want to achieve? I enjoy doing new things. So I think I loved my time at Chris Capital because we were in a new space. It was at an inflection point, was my belief. I believe we're at a similar inflection point in education. When you think about it, this juggernaut of education, we spend 3 lakh crore per year as a government, and then another 2.5% of GDP is spent by private individuals. So almost 6% of GDP is spent on education. 240 million children, 8 million teachers, 1.4 million schools. Massive, system. 20% of our population is in schools today. So it's a huge issue. But this has been focused only on this oil tanker has been moving in one direction, which is providing greater access and reducing equity. Because India needed to build more schools, get every child into school, etc. We have pretty much achieved that. Now this oil tanker needs to shift direction and start to focus on learning outcomes, quality, stuff like that. It's very hard to move a big system. But I see that that's just starting to happen. So what's exciting for me is the same way with private equity. Reforms that happened in 91. Private equity made no money in the 90s. And as we started, we could see that it was starting to turn. We were at that inflection point.
Yeah.
And then really private equity grew and became big. I think we're at that same inflection point with regards to education. So that's what excites me, is that in the next 10 years, I think we can have the chance to make much bigger impact than was made in the last 20, 30 years. And I think we can play some small role. Even at Chris Capital, we may have been there at the beginning, but many others then joined in to create the industry. And I think there's the same opportunity here.
But isn't there to make it one of the largest and the most impactful philanthropic organizations in the country?
I think here, in my mind, it's not just size. I think it's about how smartly you work in terms of, I think that there are many foundations that are small that have also had very large impact. So to me, the measure here will not be, I really don't want to go out and raise lots of money for Central Square Foundation or put in that much. I'm happy to put in more money even. But I think the clear thing we want to look at is impact and how we're making a difference, how we're doing something, how we're being innovative, what kind of policy impact we can have. Because I think we can work with many others to make a difference. So this is a slightly different word. I think in private equity, you're fundamentally competing with your brethren. Although you're creating the same industry, this is a less competitive space. We think, for instance, some of the large foundations in India, like Azim Premji Foundation, have done great work. They've been around for more than a decade. And, can we work with many other people together, at least at the intellectual level, to bring about a difference? And I think that at the intellectual level, or in terms of joining hands to work on many things, even though there'll be some very large foundations and smaller ones, there's a great opportunity to collaborate. So that I'm excited about that. I wouldn't use money spent as the measure of, how successful I am in this space.
Any particular model that you're very impressed with?
I think the Gates Foundation has pluses and minuses. But what I do like is a very clear focus on what they're trying to do. They're trying to eradicate, whether it's malaria, and the whole scientific approach to solving a problem. It's almost like a business. It's no surprise Bill Gates is a businessman, but business-like approach. And you also have to engage with government to make it happen. I think that's a very interesting model. There's another one I came across in the US that I thought was very interesting called the New Schools Venture Fund, where they were doing largely grants. They've now started to do some commercial investment, but largely grants, and combine that with, policy change, and without using up too much money, I think have had quite a bit of impact in creating this ecosystem.
Pretty much what you're doing.
Effective, yeah, similar to what we're doing. So I think those are some of the models. I mean, I recently met from Brazil, the Lehman Foundation, and they've been doing some great work there. And I think we can learn because they're another emerging market doing something very different. So there's some interesting models out there, and we clearly have studied them because we think we can learn a lot from them. Like this piece I was talking to you about, impact evaluation. I think it's big. We're learning a lot from others around that, because why reinvent the wheel? There's some people who have really figured this out, who are doing it well, and so why not just? And they've been very open, saying, "Here's all our material. See how we." This would never have happened in private equity. Nobody would say, "See, take all my internal stuff. Here are my memos. Here's my this. Here's my that, and please modify it as you please."
So I think, we have spoken about Central Square Foundation. Now I think this is about private equity, given that you pretty much defined this space. Has your perspective really changed for somebody who was in the industry to somebody who's an outsider now? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm less informed, so I don't have as good a view. I think even when I was in private equity, I had at least the ability to step back and see, is it a good time, bad time, be a little big picture. I think when you're on the outside, you obviously by definition are big picture, but you don't have the benefit of having real data from the ground. So I would say that it's not that I view it very differently today than I did earlier from a big picture perspective, but I do feel like I don't understand, from an investing perspective. I could look at a deal earlier and say, I think this is a good deal, bad deal. I have less of a view today because I don't have the details, I don't have the facts.
Mm-hmm. But what is the correct model for private equity investing in India, according to you?
I think the best model is one where there is some degree of flexibility in the model. Mm-hmm. So I think as opposed to saying this model is superior to this one, I think in India you just have to be very open and being flexible with your approach, whether it's public versus private, whether it's mid-size versus slightly larger size, whether it's buyout versus growth. I think having flexibility in the model, covering a wide range of sectors is important, because there are periods of time when a certain type of investing or a certain sector becomes unattractive. So I think having flexibility is important. And two is having really solid depth in each of the sectors you cover and solid relationships there, I think is really important. I always believe that even before a deal comes to you, you should know whether it's a good deal or bad deal. So when you look at the IT sector, you should already know in advance which are the companies you think are the winners, and you should be chasing them as opposed to waiting for them to come to you. So I think those are the two key things. One is having the flexibility, and two is doing your work in advance and almost knowing. That's what I like about the public investment space, is that you are always taking a call on who the winners will be, and you're backing them. I think as a private equity fund, you need to do the same. Private equity funds tend to be a little bit more reactive, because sometimes deals come to you and you're reacting to these deals, as opposed to being proactive and saying, I'm going to go look at the whole universe of IT companies. I'm going to decide which are the 5 horses I want to bet on, even if they're not raising money right now. So I think we're stuck at a moment where clearly people made lots of investments at the peak, and some of those are not good. And so some firms will fall by the wayside, and some will be able to come out of it and go through. I mean, nobody's going to deliver outstanding returns, over the last 4 or 5 years. But I think the key will be, at least could you generate reasonable returns, and could you exit and get money back to people. I think the biggest frustration for LPs has been the lack of return of capital. So I think those who are able to monetize, even generate modest returns, and be able to show that over time they've learned from the downturn and they've adjusted their model, And long term, they're going to do sensible things, and they've got a coherent partnership where people enjoy working with each other. A real distinctive advantage. I think those firms will continue to prosper. And I think they'll do very well because the pool of money is shrinking. Fewer people are excited about India today relative to earlier. And I think whilst makes it very hard to raise money, but the positive is that you are starting at a point in time where there's less competition.
Ashish Dhawan happier at Central Square Foundation or Chris Capital?
Today, Central Square, but my happiest moment ever was when I started Chris Capital. Yeah, I was young, I was 30 years old. We used to work till midnight every night. It was trial by fire. It's hard. At this stage of life and stuff, it's different. And I've done it before, right? So there's a certain thrill there, and that was at the peak of the internet bubble also. There was this extra energy. That was clearly a special moment. And now too, so for the moment, yes, clearly, because this is my baby, it's a new thing. But I would say the early days of Chris Capital were unbelievable.
Your best exit till now?
Best exit would be Sriram Transport.
My last question to you, a message to the LPs investing in private equity in India now.
I think LPs should take a long-term approach to India. I think it's a good time to winnow the portfolio, to say if I had 5-6 people whom I gave money to, I'm really going to use this opportunity to bring it down to 2 or 3, but not run away from the market. Because I think those people who have this episodic approach to India, they come in, they come out, are the ones who lose. I looked at LPs who came in the 90s. Those are the same LPs who stayed away between 2003 and 2007. And they missed the best opportunity to make money in Asia because they had come in too early and they'd gotten too burnt and they weren't willing to commit. So I think Asia is going to do well over the next 30 years. And having your toe in the water at all times is really important. Getting so negative on India that, hey, it's not going to make me money is the wrong conclusion to come to. And getting so bullish that, hey, I want, to be so overweight India is also the wrong conclusion. So I think LPs need to have that 10-20 year view and need to really use this opportunity to pick the highest quality managers, stay with them and be patient. I think don't blame it just on the fund manager. When there's a down cycle, it does take 7-8 years to monetize. You can't monetize in 3-4 years like you can in an up cycle. So that would be my message to LPs. I still think this is a good market.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ashish.
Thanks.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
pleasure.
much.